Imagine a small, cold office in Luxembourg City. It's 6 o'clock in the evening, January 7th, 1945.
Right in the dead of winter.
Exactly. And outside, the Battle of the Bulge is, for all intents and purposes, collapsing. The German counteroffensive is broken. But the real war, the most immediate danger for the Allies, it wasn't against those fading panzer divisions anymore.
No, not at all. It was happening right there inside Allied headquarters. And it was being fueled by, well, betrayal and a sense of absolutely frostbitten honor.
And we've taken the incredible stack of sources you've given us, which includes some really crucial operational insights from the analysts over at Hidden Front History, to do a deep dive into what might be the single most critical command crisis of the entire Second World War.
It really might be. This was the moment where the whole American-British coalition was being held together not by, grand strategy or necessity.
No.
It's being held together by one man's very, very tenuous, exhausted grip on his own temper.
And that man is General Omar Bradley. If you know anything about him, you know the nickname, the GI's General.
Oh yeah, famous name.
He was famous for his absolute calm, his methodical nature. He was really the antithesis of a showman. He looked less like a four-star general and more like a high school principal grading papers.
That's a perfect description. No pearl-handled revolvers like Patton.
None of that. No iconic beret like Montgomery. But as he's sitting at his desk on this particular evening, he's reading a transcript that has just landed in front of him. And that quiet man is experiencing a just blood-boiling, soul-shattering rage.
And that transcript is the catalyst. It's the thing that changes everything. It's a summary of a press conference given by Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery that very morning.
And for weeks, Bradley had swallowed one monumental insult after another.
I mean, his armies were taken away, his troops were being openly ridiculed, his own plans discarded.
But this was something else. This went way beyond a simple insult. Our sources, they categorize it as a deliberate theft of history and on a grand industrial scale.
It's fascinating because most of the history, it focuses on the loud arguments, the big public screaming rages of General Patton.
Of course, that's the drama.
Right. But the most dangerous, the most politically destabilizing moment for the entire Allied alliance, it didn't come with a shout from a tank commander. It came with the terrifying, absolute calm of a man who reached for the secure phone line.
The line connecting him directly to the Supreme Commander, Dwight Eisenhower.
And he wasn't reaching out to negotiate. He wasn't calling to complain or even to ask for some kind of clarification. He was calling to quit.
The subordinate, the loyal team player, had finally been pushed past his absolute limit.
And he was about to teach the Supreme Commander, his old friend Ike, a very hard lesson. A lesson in loyalty, in self-respect, and in the non-negotiable value of the American soldier.
That quiet snap of resolution was, without a doubt, the most powerful sound in the entire Allied High Command that winter.
Louder than any artillery shell.
So our mission today is to really unpack this extraordinary standoff. We're going to track how General Bradley was systematically, almost deliberately, undermined throughout that brutal winter of 1944.
And we need to get into the logistics of it. Why the German counterattack was used as a pretext for what was really coalition warfare turning into a profound personal betrayal.
And finally, we're going to analyze exactly how one man's radical, career-ending stand for the honor of his troops actually accelerated the end of the Third Reich. And not by a little bit, by weeks, maybe even months, based on the strategic analysis we've seen.
It's a critical lesson in how fragile these alliances can be. The high price of political humility and what happens when this kind of unbridled ego comes up against a justified, righteous moral fury. Let's get into it.
To really grasp the sheer volcanic resolution that seized Bradley on January 7th, you first have to understand the man himself, Omar Bradley, his character, his place within that high command.
The sources describe him as an absolute anomaly in the entire structure of World War II leadership.
They call him Bradley the Sparrow, surrounded by a whole host of self-promoting peacocks.
That analogy is just perfect. It gets right to the core of his identity.
Yeah.
Because if you look at the major Allied commanders, they were all defined by their iconography.
Oh, completely. You had Patton with his pearl-handled guns and his booming rhetoric.
MacArthur with the sunglasses and the corncob pipe, the dramatic entrances.
And Montgomery, of course, had his distinct beret, his public pronouncements, his meticulously polished public image.
And Bradley, on the other hand, he actively detested the spotlight.
He was reserved, almost aggressively ordinary in his appearance. Our sources confirm he wore entirely standard-issue uniforms, totally devoid of any kind of personal embellishment.
And he made a point of eating his meals, often just simple sea rations, with the enlisted men. And this wasn't just, a show of humility.
No, it was a philosophy.
It was a deeply held philosophy. A commander's job was to clear the path for his troops, logistically and tactically, not to chase fame or headlines for himself.
He was the ultimate professional workhorse. For 2 solid years, from the really difficult engagements in Tunisia through Sicily, right up to the breakout from Normandy, he cemented that role.
The reliable subordinate.
Exactly. The guy you could trust to execute the complex, often messy, jobs without complaint and without any fanfare.
And this choice to avoid the limelight, it wasn't passive. It was a conscious, almost tactical decision. We see these specific, documented examples of him stepping aside, consistently putting the broader mission above any potential personal glory.
Like in Sicily.
Sicily is a perfect example. He deliberately allowed Patton to grab the headlines, to take the credit for that initial push. He also let Montgomery take the operational lead in critical early maneuvers, like during the prep for Operation Cobra, even when his own plans were probably better.
He operated, as you mentioned, on what the analysts at Hidden Front History identify as the flaw in trust.
And what a flaw it was.
Bradley had this very simple, you could almost say naive belief that guided his whole career. If you do your job well, credit will take care of itself in the long run. He really believed that the facts would just speak for themselves.
But hang on, wasn't Eisenhower, his old West Point classmate and friend, already walking this impossible tightrope with the alliance?
It's a very thin rope, yeah.
So how much choice did Ike really have to be the fair referee that Bradley expected him to be? Surely Bradley understood the immense political pressure Eisenhower was under to placate London, to placate Churchill. The British still held a lot of sway over shipping and logistics.
And that's the core of the tragedy here. Bradley did understand the politics, but he naively believed that the sheer gravity of the military crisis, the Battle of the Bulge, would temporarily suspend those politics.
He trusted the system.
Implicitly. And he trusted Eisenhower to prioritize competence over diplomacy when thousands of American lives were on the line. He saw the British Army not as political rivals, but as allies, assuming a shared standard of honor and, operational urgency.
So he sees himself in the American forces as the workhorses, the ones doing the bulk of the heavy lifting, carrying the offensive burden.
And the British as the political show ponies.
And he genuinely thought Eisenhower would manage the ego clashes in a way that protected the workhorses.
But our sources, they highlight this vital, almost cynical analytical point about coalition warfare.
Which is that silence is often mistaken for weakness.
Exactly. Bradley believed his selfless, quiet approach was the mark of a good, reliable ally. The kind of guy you absolutely depend on in a crisis.
But Montgomery, coming from a background where self-promotion was basically essential for promotion, he saw that quiet efficiency completely differently.
How so?
To Montgomery, Bradley's silence wasn't a sign of professionalism. It was a sign of a doormat, or, a provincial commander who just lacked the political teeth to actually challenge him.
So it's a complete cultural and professional mismatch from the start.
Absolutely.
And Bradley spends that entire bitter winter of 1944 prioritizing the greater good, clinging to this idea that they were all one team.
Even as the Germans launched this massive, devastating counteroffensive through the Ardennes.
Even then, he's actively suppressing his personal ego. He knows how fragile the alliance is. He's the man who has to constantly manage Patton's volcanic rages.
And he's the one giving these carefully diplomatic, often evasive answers to the press when they try to stir up trouble between the Allies.
He genuinely believed fighting the Germans was the only real priority. Command squabbles were just distractions. And he assumed Montgomery would treat this life-and-death crisis with the solemn respect it demanded.
That incredible American optimism, built on the principle of fairness and shared sacrifice.
It was about to be utterly dismantled, just taken apart piece by the cold, calculating machinery of British ambition and ego.
And that dismantling process, it didn't start with a public argument. It started with a map, specifically on the night of December 20th, 1944.
That was the first serious crack in Bradley's absolute loyalty, the physical wedge driven by the German offensive.
This was the moment of tactical devastation. The German panzer thrust, led by these formidable SS units, it drove a massive wedge, we're talking 45 miles deep and about 60 miles wide, right into the American front lines.
It was a terrifying penetration, and it achieved something absolutely crucial for what comes next.
It physically cut the primary landline communication links, the ones connecting Bradley's headquarters in Luxembourg to his Northern American armies.
And that communication failure gave Eisenhower the exact rationale he needed. Or maybe the pretext he required, depending on how you look at it.
It let him make a politically necessary but militarily devastating move.
At 10:30 p.m. on December 20th, Eisenhower makes the fateful call, and he cites that communication paralysis as the official, unchallengeable justification.
And that call led directly to the catastrophic transfer.
In a single administrative stroke that night, Bradley was just gutted. He lost command of the two massive American forces that were fighting for their lives in the North.
The U.S. First Army, led by the stoic Courtney Hodges, and the U.S. Ninth Army under William Simpson.
Both of them instantly transferred to Field Marshal Montgomery's 21st Army Group, which was operating up on the northern flank.
Let's just pause and talk about the scale of this loss, because it's staggering.
It's hard to even comprehend. Bradley was stripped of 200,000 American soldiers overnight.
That's a massive operational blow. That's nearly 2/3 of his entire combat power as the 12th Army Group commander.
And more than that, these weren't green troops, these weren't replacements, these were the experienced elite divisions, the most forward-deployed units that he had trained, nurtured, and commanded since D-Day.
His command was effectively reduced to just leading Patton's Third Army in the southern part of the Bulge.
It was a demotion in everything but his official rank.
And Bradley protested immediately. He argued forcefully that his radio links were actually still functioning. He could still talk to his corps commanders, maybe with some difficulty, but the lines were open.
But the decision stood firm. He was forced to hand over his fighting men to a rival commander who not only despised American tactics, but was now in the perfect position to take all the credit for their sacrifice.
So the loss of command was the first crack. That was the professional administrative demotion.
But the second crack. The second one was intensely personal, and it was delivered with this calculated arrogance on Christmas Day of all days, December 25th.
The visual contrast alone tells the entire story. You have American troops freezing in foxholes, fighting tooth and nail, covered in the mud and snow of the Ardennes, often low on ammunition, low on supplies.
And into this absolute chaos, Montgomery arrives to inspect his new American command.
And he doesn't show up quickly or urgently. He arrives at 11 a.m.
in a highly polished Rolls-Royce staff car.
And his uniform was pristine, so pressed, so clean. It was this shocking contrast to the mud-caked, utterly exhausted American GIs fighting on the front lines. It was a calculated display of aristocratic superiority.
And his very first act wasn't a thank you or quick strategic assessment with the commanders on the ground.
No, it was an exercise in pure disdain. He immediately canceled the counterattack plan that Bradley and Hodges had meticulously prepared.
A pincer movement, right. Designed to strike the German flanks quickly near the town of Houffalize.
He threw that aggressive plan out completely, deemed it too hasty, and instead he ordered a general retreat, a tidying of the lines, as he called it.
Moving troops back to more conservative, defensive positions.
A decision which effectively delayed the crucial Allied counteroffensive by nearly 2 weeks. It just wasted precious, precious time.
12 American divisions, primed and ready to fight, were forced to just sit idle under British orders.
While the Germans were given a tactical reprieve, allowing them to consolidate their hard-won gains.
And then, beyond just the operational delay, Montgomery proceeds to lecture these veteran American corps and division generals.
Men who had been in continuous combat for 6 months.
He lectures them on the absolute basics of infantry defense, as if they were cadets. He treated the U.S. First Army not as an Allied partner, but as a broken, undisciplined unit that required the superior stabilizing hand of British intellect and discipline to survive.
For Bradley, watching all this administrative humiliation from his reduced command post in the South, this was no longer just caution. This was flagrant professional malpractice.
It was the deliberate, public disregard for the capability, the planning, and the fighting spirit of the men who had been under his command.
And that disregard was about to have lethal consequences.
This friction we're talking about, this fundamental operational incompatibility, it translated directly into lethal consequences for the American soldiers fighting in the North under Montgomery.
And to understand the depth of Bradley's eventual outrage, we have to look beyond the generals and into the differences in the operational cultures that were clashing in the Ardennes mud.
The clash of operational speeds was really a matter of life and death.
It was. The American GIs and their commanders, they fought with the core philosophy of initiative and decentralized action. Their mantra, instilled by Bradley and Patton, was desperate improvisation.
Move fast, exploit gaps, trust your junior officers.
Break things and get home. Speed and initiative always trumped a rigid process.
But Montgomery's 21st Army Group, however, it operated by the book.
And as our sources detail, that book was very slow and very, very thick. It was a system built on meticulous planning, on phase lines, detailed synchronization, centralized control. It was the complete opposite of the American style.
And the reports that started filtering back to Bradley were just horrifying. They detailed specific instances of what you can only call lethal red tape.
For example, you had American units that had identified a critical German weakness and were ready to launch a localized counterattack, and they were ordered to halt.
And the reason?
The reason was that the British flanking units hadn't finished their highly specific morning reorganization routines, so the action was delayed by critical hours.
And the most maddening examples, the ones that really stand out, they involved fire support.
Oh, we have documented cases of this. American forward observers desperately calling in urgent artillery requests to suppress German fire, requests that were vital for evacuating wounded men.
And what happened?
These requests were calmly denied by British liaison officers because they hadn't been cleared through the proper, highly bureaucratic, multi-step channels required by Montgomery's protocol.
So it wasn't just a battlefield annoyance, it was a deadly operational drag.
One furious American commander reportedly said that fighting under Montgomery was literally like trying to sprint while wearing lead boots.
And this administrative inertia meant that German tanks, German infantry pockets, which could have been destroyed in minutes by rapid American initiative.
They were just allowed to escape. Why?
Yeah.
Because British protocol required a signed, authorized order. It replaced American speed with paralyzing rigidity.
This must have just resonated so deeply with Bradley. He felt those delays, those failures as intensely personal wounds.
He's watching from the sidelines as his men, now under the command of his rival, are being slowed down and systematically sacrificed.
And his realization must have sharpened. Montgomery's excessive, rigid caution wasn't saving lives. It was actively wasting them.
His men were dying not just from German bullets, but from the friction and failure of an overly bureaucratic, centralized command structure.
And this is where we have to connect the military tactics to that deeper cultural chasm, the element of class warfare that our sources repeatedly highlight.
Montgomery wasn't just tactically cautious. He was culturally arrogant.
Explain that concept of class warfare in this context. I mean, it seems like a very powerful claim to make in a deep dive about command structure.
It is powerful, but it's really substantiated by Montgomery's own documented behavior and his writings. Montgomery was a product of the aristocratic British military establishment, and he viewed Bradley, this quiet, reserved Missourian who rose purely through merit, as a rustic colonial.
So it's not just that he's a professional rival.
No, he genuinely believed that the lack of British-style formality and discipline in the U.S. Army stemmed from a lack of inherent intellectual rigor, a lack of breeding.
So it wasn't just about them having different tactical manuals. It was about an inherent sense of superiority.
Precisely. He viewed American soldiers and officers not as equal partners, but as raw biological material to be managed by superior British intellect.
Wow.
And this patronizing view, it allowed him to justify the delays, to justify the operational restraints. In his mind, the Americans had caused this mess through their undisciplined speed, and only his measured formal discipline could possibly fix it.
And it's that inherent, deep-seated disdain that fueled the destructive delays.
And it set the stage for the ultimate act of disrespect, the catastrophic press conference.
All of this simmering resentment, the administrative demotion, the humiliation, the lethal delays, the cultural disdain, it all came to this unbearable head on January 7th, 1945.
And the psychological, the moral breaking point, it wasn't delivered by a military message or a battlefield report. It was delivered by a broadcast signal coming across the airwaves.
And you have to put yourself in Bradley's shoes on that day. The immediate context is absolutely critical.
The butcher's bill.
The butcher's bill for the Battle of the Bulge was sitting right on his desk. And this wasn't just a number on a page. It was a horrifying piece of paper, heavy with the weight of death.
The final tally for the U.S. Army stood at 19,246 American soldiers killed, 47,500 wounded, and 23,000 missing or captured.
This officially cemented December 1944 as the single bloodiest month in the entire history of the U.S. Army. That magnitude of American sacrifice is the emotional fuel for everything that happens next.
So with the memory of those numbers fresh in his mind, Bradley turns on the radio to hear Field Marshal Montgomery's press conference being broadcast live.
And for a full half hour, 30 agonizing minutes, he listened to what he could only describe later as a sickening fantasy.
Montgomery spoke about the Battle of the Bulge, not as the desperate, chaotic struggle for survival that claimed nearly 20,000 Americans.
No, he talked about it as a tidy British operation that he had personally salvaged.
He presented himself as the tactical savior,
Yeah.
riding in on his polished Rolls-Royce to rescue the disorganized, panicking Americans from total disaster. He praised himself for restoring the front and launching the decisive counterstroke.
And this was where the theft occurred. Montgomery claimed credit for a victory that was bought entirely with American blood, using what the sources call a sickening distortion of data to build his own legend.
Let's look at the crucial data comparison that Bradley knew intimately. The fiercest fighting, the most devastating casualty rates, all of it happened in the critical northern sector.
The very sector Eisenhower had transferred to Montgomery's command.
That victory, the stabilization of the line, and the eventual reduction of the German salient, it was achieved by the U.S. 1st and 9th Armies at the cost of 80,000 American casualties.
80,000. Now compare that to Montgomery's own contribution in that same critical northern sector.
His own British XXX Corps, which he boasted of positioning so perfectly, was held largely in reserve.
And suffered fewer than 200 casualties throughout the entire battle.
He was taking credit for the results of a battle that he had barely participated in, using the operational shield created by the sacrifice of American boys from Kansas and Iowa and Ohio.
To Bradley, this was far, far beyond simple professional arrogance. This was stolen valor on an industrial scale.
Montgomery wasn't just patting himself on the back. He was actively, publicly constructing his personal legend, the myth of Monty the Unbeatable, on the corpses of young American men who had frozen and died in the snow of the Ardennes.
And that is the precise point of moral breaking. Every single time Monty used the first-person singular, I reorganized, I stabilized the line, I launched the counterattack.
Bradley felt it as a profound desecration.
A violation of the memory of every single man whose name was on that casualty report sitting on his desk.
The illusion of the noble ally, the partner working towards a common goal. It didn't just shatter. The sources note it rotted right there on the desk.
Bradley, the man who believed in fair play and quiet competence, suddenly realized he was working under a thief and a cynical political operator.
The moment that radio was switched off, the air in Bradley's headquarters, a place usually humming with maps and orders, it went completely silent.
And the reaction that followed is the central pivot of this entire story. It proves that resolution can be far more powerful than rage.
Bradley did not scream. He didn't smash the radio or throw the transcript against the wall.
Which is exactly what Patton would have done instinctively.
Oh, without a doubt. Instead, what settled over him was a terrifying calm. Our sources describe it not as the heat of anger, but the coldness of a man who had been bent and stretched and insulted for months until the underlying metal finally cleanly snapped.
This wasn't emotional fury. This was absolute final resolution.
For 3 long years of war, he had performed the role of the nice guy, the stabilizing doormat, the operational glue keeping the explosive personalities of the alliance from flying apart.
He had endured Eisenhower, sacrificing his dignity to placate Churchill and maintain that political alignment.
But in that moment, staring at the casualty report and that press transcript, he was done. Done selling the honor of the U.S. Army for British goodwill.
He looks at the secure phone line, the one connecting him directly to Eisenhower's headquarters.
And when he picked up the receiver, his voice was reportedly conversational, almost gentle, which made the words he was about to speak sound like a profound death sentence for the current state of the alliance.
This was the binary choice. He didn't waste any time on historical arguments or tactical appeals. He went straight to the heart of the matter and delivered a direct, non-negotiable ultimatum.
He said, "Ike, you have a choice to make. I cannot serve under Montgomery. If he commands American troops again, you can send me home."
There was zero compromise offered, zero room for negotiation.
It was him or me. The loyal subordinate, the team player who swallowed his pride for the good of the mission, was gone.
And in his place was the commander, holding a metaphorical gun directly to the head of the entire Allied command structure.
He realized that the mission could no longer be salvaged by sacrificing the honor of his men.
The reaction on the other end of the line was apparently palpable. The silence that followed was described by those who were there as being heavier than any artillery barrage.
Eisenhower, who often operated best by avoiding direct confrontation, he reportedly realized the gravity of it instantly. The doormat had just become an immovable stone wall.
He understood he wasn't just risking a general resigning, he was risking the total catastrophic collapse of the entire American command structure in Europe.
If Bradley went home, he was taking the vast majority of the American field armies with him, at least spiritually. Ike suddenly understood he had pushed his most loyal, his best friend, way too far.
Risking the entire war effort just to placate Churchill.
And the sources point to the deep personal nature of this wound. Bradley and Ike weren't just colleagues. They were West Point classmates. They were deep friends.
And by allowing Montgomery to humiliate Bradley for weeks, stripping his command, treating him with disdain, and then failing to defend him from that press conference, Eisenhower had committed the ultimate personal betrayal.
Bradley's goal with the ultimatum, though, it wasn't just vengeance against Montgomery.
No.
It was forcing Eisenhower to stop being a nervous coalition politician and finally act like the American commander he was supposed to be.
It was a cry of pain from a man who realized his immense loyalty had been consistently used as a political weapon against him and against his troops.
And crucially, the mutiny spread instantly. The moment the news of Bradley's stand reached George Patton, the Third Army commander just threw gasoline on the fire.
He roared over the phone, offering absolute immediate solidarity.
"Tell him to go to hell, Brad. I'll quit with you. We'll both go home and tell the truth to the American people."
Suddenly, Eisenhower wasn't facing a single calculated resignation. He was facing a full-blown mutiny of his two most critical field commanders. The entire U.S. command structure was solidifying against Montgomery and the political appeasement of the British.
The calculation became impossible for Ike. The political cost of continuing to appease the British and risking the loss of his two best field commanders and the morale collapse that would follow was now impossibly high.
The illusion of the one team was dead, replaced by a decisive, clear fracture. Eisenhower had no choice but to act, and swiftly, to save the entire military campaign.
The response from Eisenhower, compelled by this sudden and overwhelming threat of command collapse, was indeed swift and absolute. He didn't just send Montgomery a reprimand.
No, he literally redrew the map of the European theater of operations. He reversed his earlier strategic decision.
Barely 10 days after that furious press conference on January 17, 1945, the U.S. First Army was returned immediately to Bradley's command.
And this was weeks earlier than Montgomery had meticulously planned for the transfer to happen. It was a public slap in the face to the field marshal.
And the effect of this restoration of command on Bradley was electric.
Now, unshackled from British supervision and protocol, he unleashed the 12th Army Group with this cold, almost surgical fury.
He was no longer waiting for permission. He wasn't consulting the map for British phase lines. He began aggressively driving his armies toward the Rhine River, initiating the deep drive into the heart of Germany.
And he pointedly ignored Montgomery's subsequent and increasingly frantic pleas for support in his own sector up in the north.
And then came the moment that served as the ultimate irrefutable vindication of Bradley's entire stand, the final, devastating proof that speed and initiative beat caution and protocol.
This arrived in March 1945 at the little town of Remagen. This is the moment the schoolteacher finally threw off the gloves and commanded at full capacity.
To understand the power of Remagen, you have to contrast Bradley's action with Montgomery's concurrent planning. At that time, Montgomery was meticulously organizing Operation Plunder.
This massive set-piece textbook crossing of the Rhine River further north?
This was vintage Monty. Weeks of preparatory work, the requisition of 30,000 engineers, stockpiling thousands of artillery guns, millions of tons of supplies.
And he demanded that all other Allied efforts pause and divert critical logistical resources to support his grand show,
to ensure he alone would get the glory of being the first across the river in force.
The scale of plunder was meant to be overwhelming, a guaranteed success based on resources and timing, designed to prevent mistakes like the ones he thought the Americans made.
Meanwhile, Bradley, now operating with his cold, independent focus, he ignored that grand script entirely. He just focused on relentless forward movement.
And that relentless pressure paid off spectacularly. On March 7, 1945, elements of Bradley's U.S. 9th Armored Division, pushing far ahead of their assigned phase lines, they stumbled upon the Ludendorff Bridge at Remagen.
It was miraculously intact, the only standing bridge left across the Rhine in that entire critical sector.
And the command decision made by Bradley in that moment illustrates the profound difference in leadership philosophy.
Did he ask Eisenhower for permission? Potentially taking hours or a full day for deliberation at Supreme Headquarters.
No. Did he call Montgomery, whose protocol would have required halting the action for weeks of preparation?
Absolutely not. He acted instantly. The report came in, and he shouted one order that cut through all the bureaucracy and protocol that had shackled him for months.
Get across!
The strategic implications were enormous. The Rhine was Germany's last great natural defense barrier.
And the speed of American initiative was critical and devastating. While Montgomery was still rehearsing his grand speeches and lining up his thousands of guns for the main performance of plunder,
Bradley's troops were already pouring across the Rhine. The American 9th Armored secured the eastern bank.
and by the time Montgomery finally launched his expensive, highly publicized operation weeks later, Bradley already had 4 full divisions securely established on the German side of the river, deep inside the Reich.
The humiliation was total, and it was public. The slow, rustic Americans had achieved the most significant military prize of the year, beating the protocol-driven British to the Rhine crossing.
Montgomery was reportedly furious. He was demanding that Eisenhower restrict the expansion of the Remagen bridgehead, arguing it was drawing resources away from his planned safer crossing.
But Bradley's success silenced him.
The capture of Remagen, bypassing weeks of preparation and set-piece maneuvers, drastically shortened the war. It gave the Allies immediate access to Germany's industrial heartland and just disrupted the entire German defense strategy.
The Hidden Front history analysis confirms it. This act alone was Bradley's silent, devastating answer to the press conference of January 7th.
He didn't need a microphone to claim victory. He just needed a bridge and the freedom to act decisively.
The personal relationship between Bradley and Montgomery was, quite simply, incinerated.
It never recovered.
Not at all. For the remainder of the war, Bradley maintained only the most icy professional distance with the field marshal. He communicated only through mandated channels and with an absolute economy of words.
The facade of Allied cooperation, all those political niceties, were over. And we see this professional separation in action during the critical encirclement of the Ruhr pocket in April 1945.
Right. Bradley famously kept his operational plans deliberately vague when he was communicating with the British command structure.
Why?
He feared that if Montgomery understood the true speed and depth of the American drive, he would try to intervene politically. He'd demand that Bradley slow down or hold positions simply to allow the 21st Army Group to catch up and share the glory of the encirclement.
So he refused to coordinate his movements with the British unless he was explicitly directly ordered to do so by Eisenhower himself.
The good ally, who always put the mission first, transformed into the definitive independent operator who prioritized effectiveness above diplomacy.
And this shift created a fundamental acceleration in the pace of the Allied advance.
The historical conclusion drawn from the end phase of the war is unambiguous. When the American military machine stopped worrying about diplomatic constraints, about political protocol and inter-allied squabbling, and just started fighting its own war at its own speed.
It was unstoppable.
The difference between the speed of the advance in late 1944 and early 1945 is testament to the effectiveness of that decentralized, initiative-driven command.
History remembers General Bradley, and rightly so, as the GI's general, because he looked like a common soldier and he treated them with respect. But as we've seen today, his greatest act of leadership wasn't achieved on a battlefield with a gun in his hand or a map in his tent.
No, it was executed on a secure phone line, in a quiet office, staring down political betrayal.
By refusing, absolutely and unconditionally, to compromise the honor of the U.S. Army and serve under a man who had stolen their sacrifice, he reclaimed the dignity of his forces.
He taught history a profound lesson. Humility is vital in leadership, but self-respect and the defense of the honor of your subordinates, that is a non-negotiable requirement. There comes a moment when even the quietest, most restrained man must stand up and say, enough.
The man who looked like he was grading papers didn't just teach Eisenhower a lesson that day. He commanded respect through moral force, and in doing so, he allowed the American war machine to finally operate at its full, terrifying, strategic speed.
So we've really covered this intense dramatic arc. The quiet man who tolerated insult after insult, but refused to let his men's sacrifice be stolen and exploited for political ego and for media gain.
And this extraordinary standoff, it shows you that even in the highest stakes of global war, individual self-respect and moral clarity are essential strategic elements.
Bradley's stand created a fracture, a necessary break from the diplomatic status quo that ultimately benefited the Allied cause by prioritizing decisive, swift action over cautious, centralized bureaucracy.
And that leaves us with a provocative final thought for you to consider as you reflect on this deep dive.
Given the immense geopolitical stakes of coalition warfare, where political unity is always considered paramount, was General Bradley's ultimate act of loyalty to his troops, his absolute refusal to compromise their honor, also an act of necessary disloyalty to the political alliance that was prosecuting the war? Was breaking the alliance, in that moment, the only way to save the war? Think about that challenging balance.